All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Middle Ground, Mike. We're going to do another episode today on masculinity and the male movement. I got some really good guests here today. I've got Fred and Jack. Jack, what's the name of your podcast again?
Well, I don't have a podcast anymore. I did one for a while, but there's a lot of work in being a podcast host, as you very well know.
Oh yeah.
I I have sort of stepped back, and I'm now exclusively a podcast guest.
Okay.
It's a lot easier, and it gives me a chance to talk with new audiences about what's going on with men. But I do want to
Oh yeah.
say that your guest star today is Fred Hayward, so I'm really just here to sort of smile and listen to you two talk.
Yeah, Fred, go to give us a little bit of a background about yourself. Just introduce yourself to the listeners.
All right. My activism started in 1976 when I went to a national conference. It was an annual conference on men and masculinity, and it had the top people in the country, maybe in the world, somewhere from other countries, in that field of what was considered men's issues. And I was talking to them. I had been very dissatisfied with feminism because of the way it described my life, and its description of my life and my feelings had no relationship to my actual life and my actual feelings. So I was dissatisfied, and I went to this conference to hopefully meet like-minded people. And instead, they kept saying to me, "Wow, I never thought of that before." And I'm thinking, wait, you're an expert on men's issues. You never thought about men's life expectancy. You never thought about military conscription. You never thought about the implications of saving women in lifeboats you never thought about any of that. And I spoke to someone who at that time was the darling of the feminist movement, Warren Farrell. And he said, "You have a lot of really interesting things to say, and you should." And so I decided to quit my teaching job and work in the men's movement, except for what I considered what the men's movement should be. It didn't exist. So that meant my first task was to create a men's movement. That's what I did. And I found out later on, this was before the internet, that there was somebody 400 miles to the south of me who was thinking along the same lines and doing the same things. And we hooked up together. That's
Nice.
Richard Haddad, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But together we co-founded the men's movement, the men's rights movement. But it's not masculine. Like, I very quickly realized that I don't want to create a movement that replicates the same mistakes that feminism was making, because it's very easy to look from the male position and say, well, women have all the power and it's all women's fault, and start blaming and resenting women. And I didn't want that. I wanted something in the middle ground, a different kind of equal rights movement that, I don't know how much, like, I could just keep talking for the next hour. All right, I'll tell you more about it then. If you start with basic misconceptions, important assumptions, and they're wrong, and then create analysis and policies based on that, you can't expect that your analysis is going to be wrong. It's kind of similar to, like, if you're in a train and there's a train next to you and one of you starts to move, but you're not really sure who's moving, and you might think the other train's moving, they might think you're moving, and eventually you'll figure it out. But if trains are infinitely long, you might never figure it out. And like in astronomy, originally we might have thought that the sun revolved around the earth, and starting with that assumption, they were able to explain stars and comets and eclipses and the days, and everything made sense, but they were wrong, and
Right.
the whole astronomy had to be changed when they realized, oh no, the earth revolves around the sun. And then they came up with new explanations, which were also wrong. But at the time, like, it was hundreds of years before people realized it was wrong, because the explanations seemed to make sense. Feminism did that same thing. Feminism started with a basic misconception about the male-female relationship. And that assumption was that men and women are basically opposites and competitors. So if women have it bad, men have it good. If women feel powerless, men feel powerful. If women didn't start the system, men did start the system. If women are innocent, men are guilty, and so on. If you help men, you're hurting women. And so that's what their analysis led to, was greater resentment and anger between men and women.
Oh, yes.
New sexist stereotypes, although they said they were going to eliminate them, they've created new ones. They've created new rationalizations for sex discrimination. So it's not, you can expect all of these wrong analyses and policies, because we inherently know, almost everybody knows, men and women are not competitors. Basically, we're interdependent. And if you start with that realization that men and women are interdependent, and then you start to analyze society, you come with a whole different analysis, all different policies, a whole different kind of movement. So that's what I set out to try to create.
Yeah, one of the big things that for me that I've personally noticed, and I want to say like I have an issue with or anything, but so in today's day and age, women have a lot more access to, I won't say access, but they get a lot of higher paying jobs than they did 70, 80 years ago. So in some situations, the wife or girlfriend is the breadwinner per se. And that is like it's accepted in the public eye, but behind closed doors, it is not in a lot of situations. So I've noticed in a lot of those situations, the man, even without any intent from the woman in a bad way, feels emasculated, feels like he's less than. And I feel like that still comes from that part where society publicly and on commercials will sing kumbaya, or they'll say men are bad, but behind the scenes, it's still, you're still expected to hold this down, you're still expected to do that. And I think that that's what's led to the higher rates of divorce, because we don't respect I want to say natural roles, right? But we don't accept the roles that some people just do. Like, like I had said, my wife is way better at managing the kids than I, and that's okay. I hold ill will against her on that. There's nothing ever that I would ever be upset with my wife for. But my wife supports me with I got a crazy busy job. I'm always in a million things at one time. It's just kids. But then I notice I have, I'll say, family members to where the female has a better paying job than her husband, but she still wants to be a kept woman. And so right at the beginning of COVID, he worked for a bank and got laid off. Slash, they closed his branch. Well, we were all over for dinner, and she looks at him like something's wrong with him. And I'm going, well, they gave him a 2-year severance package, so you're not going to really be a two. But she just had this look that was, something's wrong with you because you're not leaving the house now, even though she makes more than him. And I thought, like, I'm sitting there, I'm going, man, how wrong is that? This is your husband, this is your partner. This is not the time to be giving him that look. Maybe tomorrow, if you need to give him that look to kind of give him a little bit of oomph to get out there, to get going. Because sometimes, we all need that little bit of a pick me up, if you want to call it, to get back out there, get on the horse and try again. And that right there, at that point, I think my opinion of a lot of things changed, because that was the first time in my life that I had seen a man, like in person, I guess, be quietly ostracized for not being that guy at that point in time. And it was a very, I guess it was a rude awakening. And, I looked at my wife, and my wife just kind of looked at me, and she's like, don't say nothing. And I'm like, I'm not going to, it's not my home, not my place. But I really wanted to be like, hey, this is when we should support a man and not put him down. I mean, lots of men go through life where, hey, you've worked somewhere for 30 years, company changes, sold, whatever, you're forced out. And it's in this day and age to where if that's a woman, the man is expected to support her, be your spouse, be your husband. Even when you go see a lot of YouTube videos, oh, I don't date a man because he's not doing ABC. But then you'll also hear, she's a YouTuber, I believe her name's Emily, I forget her last name. She does a lot of stuff like, hey, this is why men don't want to date women. They don't want to feel less than when they talk to you. If you're gonna film them and ostracize them, they're not going to respond to you, and that's why you're single and unhappy. And then when I kind of got introduced to her, my views, I was like, okay, I'm like, wow, there is a woman out there who doesn't automatically look as a man that way.
Yeah, we've worked really hard. We had to work hard on men to raise their consciousness and to get them to accept women in not in traditional roles, to accept equality for women and freedom from traditional expectations. We worked hard to do that, but
Oh yeah,
we haven't even begun to work on women, because the assumption is that women are already perfect, and so we haven't begun to work on women and teach them and raise their consciousness and get them to accept men in non-traditional roles and in those ways. And yeah, that's really important. And as you said, women still expect a man, like when they're evaluating potential partners, he should be at or above their level. They still expect that. But if the relationship breaks down, then the assumption is that, oh, men can't handle independent women, men can't handle successful
yes,
women, and the man is blamed, but we're oblivious to the reverse part of that problem.
yeah. It is so common for men to be blamed if that they cannot handle an independent woman. And I guess I still fail to this day to. I mean, I know what the definition that people use for an independent woman. Not that I'm ignorant to that, but I guess I just don't understand what this whole thing of an independent woman is. I'm like, my whole life I've been seeing women do these things, and I get from like, 50, 60, 70 years ago, yeah, that is independent. But if you're under the age of like 45, what do you know about that? And I don't mean that as a negative towards any woman that works hard,
Yeah.
but you've grown up in a fairly independent environment to where you have the ability to do as you want. You have the ability to pursue your own dreams. So when it comes down to it, I'm like, you're not facing the same issues that your mother and your grandmother did. How are you so like? And those women were way less frustrated than their granddaughters and daughters are. And I guess I'm kind of like, okay, we're all in this together. If a couple has a kid, even if for whatever reason the man becomes the woman in the relationship, however you would like to word it, right? I guess to me that's okay if that's what you want to do, but it's got to be respected in the home, and the home cannot worry about what the outside world thinks of it. And that's where that outside influence comes in, and it makes a lot of women kind of go
Yeah.
against the men.
I wonder, Joe, did you register for the draft when you were 18?
Yep, I didn't have a choice.
Did you think about it
Yeah,
or because I registered too when I was registering for the draft, the Vietnam War was on, and so I was going to school with my female classmates who were complaining that you could do anything you want and we have all these limitations. And I'm thinking, no, when I graduate, you can do anything you want. I either have to say I'm gay or leave the country or go to jail or go to a halfway around the world to kill people or to be killed. And how would it be if we said, we have a national crisis for children growing up. They need better daycare. They need so people could go out and work and so on. And we need better preschools. So, but our professional military is strong enough to defend ourselves. Let's eliminate military conscription completely. We don't need it. But at the age of 18, every girl has to register her body with the government to work in a daycare center for 2 years, or we'll send her to jail. And it would be outrage. I don't think women would accept that. It would be the
no,
worst kind of sexism that women have experienced. Register my body. You mean you're going to tell me where I have to live, what clothes I have to wear,
yes,
what job I have to do, and I have no control over that? So it would like I saw men's issues, back in the 70s, and it's amazing how we accept it. I was really looking forward when I heard that your podcast is called The Middle Ground, Mike.
hmm yeah,
That's like a big thing for me because people assume we've been taught that the past was oppressive towards women and men were privileged, and it's a pendulum, and now, okay, maybe the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, so we have
yeah,
to find a middle ground. From my perspective, we had a middle ground. Men and women each had, for men, it was in the productive sphere, and for women, it was in the reproductive sphere. But in our respective spheres, we each had our own unique powers and unique responsibilities. And we were interdependent, and we depended on no species could survive if we weren't in that middle ground. There has to be a balance between male and female for every species. And what feminism has done is knocked us off balance. And we have to go back to balance. And the choice is, do we want to go back to the traditional sexist balance, or do we want to go forward to a non-sexist balance? But either way, it has to be in balance. And feminism has knocked us off balance and suppressed discussion of what that balance should be.
Yeah, and so, when I had looked at that about the selective service, right? You have to register when you're 18. When you look at countries like Israel, most of Europe, I'm not sure about Asia, I haven't looked into it too much, but a lot of them, women are required to do military service just as much as,
But
and I found,
not just as much. And
oh,
probably Israel is the most extreme example of being close to equality, but it's not equality. The men serve longer, and you see
okay,
with the
true.
hostage situation that in Israel they negotiate for the release of female hostages. They still save the women before you save the men. And the reports are that the men are being sexual assaulted, the men are being killed. Like, it's not like the male hostages have it easy, but it's just accepted that we free the women first. So even there, which is the most equal country in the world of necessity, it's still not equal.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like that. It's like if you took, you know, I don't know, somebody breaks into your house, right? Let's say, both partners are equal, man and woman, there's no issue there, right? But somebody breaks in the house, they're going crazy. To me, it's like wired in a man's DNA to step up. Hey, I got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't even think, it just happens.
Yeah, you go
You know,
downstairs and see who it is.
right? And it's not saying I'm better than my wife. No. It's just it's in your instinct to do
Mm-hmm.
that. Just like going saving a woman first. I feel like in a lot of men, it's just that's what I got to do. Like it doesn't even cross your mind. It doesn't even. It's not even something that you debate. You just do it. And I think that even in a modern time, we need to be equal with that. But I also think that if that's the way a certain situation goes for some people, that's okay as well. But they've got to be okay with the fact that, hey, that's just what that is. But my partner in the house is still no different than me. I would hope if that guy
Yeah.
shoots me, that my wife would shoot him too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
or
And there you're protecting someone you love, and that's some more protecting people you love is natural, it's instinctual. But I still, if I might be at a meeting late at night and some woman will say, would you walk me to my car? And I know her, like, what she's really saying is, would you, if we get attacked, would you try to die slowly enough so that I can get away from, and be safe? Like, I
and
kind of
that's
resent that. Like, I barely know you, and you're expecting me to die for you. Why would you
yeah,
walk me to
it's
my car?
and in today's day and age where if a man says something that can be a little off, it can be used against him as, harassment, this, that, and the other thing. So I've learned to be very careful in those kind of situations to where I always try to A, make sure there's another person around, or B, not try to stick myself in that situation to begin with if I'm able to avoid it. And that's more of like self preservation because I've seen that stuff go sideways for men before, where I'm looking at it like, man, this guy had no funny intent behind it. He wasn't trying to do anything to hurt, or he was just being casually like, hey, you look nice today. Sexual harassment. Oh, no, that's not sexual harassment. That's just being polite. That doesn't even necessarily mean he's interested in you. He's just being polite. And to me, that's not even necessarily that something men are taught. It's just a natural thing to do. Just like some women would be like, hey, you look nice today. But a man doesn't turn around and say, man, you just sexually harassed me today.
Yeah,
And I feel
I
like
think
that
maybe the teaching, Joe, is teaching women to evaluate that and be angry if they're not attracted to the man, and you should be angry with them. Men are not taught to be angry, so
right.
the,
Yeah, well, that kind of thinks, going back to this Emily lady, I'll have to send you guys her YouTube channel. She is probably like how we're talking. She is like the epitome of how the modern woman should be evolving to me. And I don't mean that degrading towards any woman, but she's very like, hey, that man wants to be he wants to be treated and valued. He doesn't just want to be looked at as a paycheck. And women, some of the women these days, like I had said about, my family, they ostracize me because you're not doing this, sitting there going, hey, you should approach this like this, you need to take care of me, your feelings don't matter. Somebody that I follow, I'm not too big into rap, but there's an artist called, his name is Dak. And he made a song that says to be a man. And it was probably like the most, like, I guess it like hit home, right? And I watched a lot of people on YouTube like, hey, how do other men feel about this? Because I was really curious. And all these men that, you and I probably look at and go, oh, that's a pretty progressive person. It brought them to tears. And you could tell deep down, even though they were saying, you could tell deep down they still felt that way. One of the things he talks about is, you're expected to be a man, provide pretty much. But then when you die, the woman moves on to another guy to lean on. And you know, and that's the natural case in a lot of situations, right? He was trying to highlight how that makes some men feel. Like it's like, hey, that just leaves that empty part in there, like you don't fully trust the situation you're in. He also talks about how, obviously the man is expected to provide. How pretty much he on his way home from work, it shows him crying from a frustrated day, whatever it could be, right? But as soon as he walks in that house, he's in dad and husband mode. Smiling, doing the right thing, hugging his kids, even though he just had the worst day of his life. And he talks about that. He also has Darius Rucker on there as well. And it was a very eye-opening song. And it was crazy to me that this song got like millions of downloads, but I never once heard it on the radio. Not once.
Yeah. I
Not
think
once
I,
was it put in the mainstream.
I think I saw that the video, is the music video. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was very effective.
yeah,
We
and
would
and, and
have
that. No, go ahead.
if we if we accept that men and women are interdependent rather than competitors and say, now let's have a discussion from there. It's easy to identify sexism because anytime you're treating a man and a woman different because of their sex, that's sexism. And so it's easy to identify those issues. And if we had a new discussion, okay, so now this is sexist, what should we do about it? We would be able to treat all of those problems. We would have such a better movement instead of what we've done so far is that the women have not been willing to discuss it together. What should we do about it? They're just starting with the assumption that, well, men have it good, so what men have, we want. So actually, I formed Men's Rights Incorporated. What was a nonprofit corporation that I formed right at the beginning, 1977. I did it hopefully to get grants, which I couldn't get because feminists control the grant money. But I chose that name because of men's rights was MR, and I wanted to be called Mr. Inc. And I wanted to do that as an example of where the different kind of discussion we would have had when women said, we have two titles, Miss and Mrs., and you only have one. And instead of the knee-jerk reaction of, well, so we want one because you have it better because you're a man, we would have had a discussion. Okay, where should we go? This is clearly a sexist issue. It's different for men and women. Where should we go from here? For men, since our role is to initiate relationships and take that risk of rejection, which is hard enough, and we wish you would share that with us, but you're not. And so for us, it's really good to have a code to know who's married and who's not, who's potentially available and who's not. For us, it serves a purpose. If you would start to initiate relationships with us, maybe we should have two things so you would know whether we're married or not. But let's go further in this discussion. Why do we need titles? If You are correct that if you apply for a job, it should be none of their business whether you're married or not. But if you're applying for a job, it should be none of their business if you're a man or a woman. So why should we even have sexist titles? The Black Lives Matter civil rights movement never said, let's create a name, a code in our title so that you know if a person is black or white. They never said that because they knew that would be ridiculous. That would not further the goal of equal rights and bringing whites and blacks together. That would be the exact opposite of what you want to do. So creating the title of Ms. was the exact opposite of what a real equal rights movement would do. We would have this discussion instead, men and women together, where should we go from here? And you could look at every single issue in society, and what we need to do is have a new discussion involving men and women together. Where should we go from here?
Yeah, and a big part of that to me is getting a lot of these folks to realize that neither side is the enemy walking in the door. Because, if you're married, not married, spouse, whatever, that person walking in the door drinks the same water, eats the same food, obviously doesn't think the same way usually. But, I think that that's a starting point. And then, like you were saying, instead of Mrs. and Mrs., you were saying Ms. Or they could just choose Miss or Mrs. That's just what we say in general. And that's, I don't see why why is that so hard for society to do? It doesn't make sense, but it just seems like that a certain section of the feminist movement would rather focus on fanning the flames instead of taking your approach and trying to solve the issue. They want to keep everybody divided because it funnels and it puts money into what they're trying to do. Because if we try to fix the problems, a lot of certain groups would fade away and the money that they're getting would fade away.
Yeah.
And, and so I feel like there's a financial incentive for some of these groups, especially in the feminist sphere, to fuel the divide. Because, if you're somebody that's the head of one of these really big, huge groups and you're getting paid $1 million a year, there's not a whole lot of incentive to you to solve the problem because you're going to lose that $1 million a year, and that's a whole lot of cash to tell somebody to give up.
Yeah, that's the
it's the money.
implication. That's the implication
Yeah,
of something I said earlier, which was that feminists said they want to end sexist stereotyping, but they created new ones. And they say they want to end sex discrimination, but they created new programs that discriminate on the basis of sex. So they haven't advanced that goal of ending sexism, but they got a lot of money and power. And that's the bottom line. And I totally agree with you on that.
money and power are the biggest obstacles to accomplishing a lot of goals in any atmosphere, but especially this one to me. And I guess that's why I've kind of pursued it a little bit. I have a friend. She's got a PhD. I believe she works in the state of Michigan. And her and I were talking, and I've been trying to get her on to do an episode because she falls in line a lot more with how you think. And her and I were talking, and she goes, "Yeah, I'm always nervous how to say certain things because I don't want the feminazis to come and get me."
Yeah.
And that's the first time, honestly, I'd ever heard that phrase. I was like, okay, and I had never heard that phrase or anything of that nature come out of a woman's mouth before. And I was like, man, I would love to have you on because I told her, I said, I feel like a lot of men would love to hear what you have to say. And I feel like it would give them a platform to understand a woman's perspective and how she sees equality. So one big thing she told me is in her marriage, it took her a lot of work to get her husband to trust her with how he feels
Maybe you
and
could do
not just
that,
lock it
have
away.
her on, offer to to blur her face or something,
Yeah,
which would get across both everything that she said, but also make the point of how dangerous it is to say these things publicly.
yeah, and it is, and it's very, very, it's very unfortunate, and it stuck out to me. And she said, I had to work with my husband to get him to trust me with how he feels. And I'm like, man, wow. I was like, you don't hear women say those things, right? You generally don't. It's a lot of times if a man's crying or upset, well, while they may not say it, they'll imply he's being a baby, and it's like, hey, man, sometimes something just gets to a guy, especially if it's a tragic event, in his life. something like that may happen. To me, I don't. I, what's the problem with that? You know what I mean? I think it's quite okay for a man to shed a tear. I don't think it makes him any less than. But there's a lot of women out there who still will look down on a man for doing those things, and I've seen it firsthand. And that just, it really kind of started pushing me towards more towards exploring my opinions on a lot of things. Made me want to start talking to people. It really, because it hit home so hard. And I was like, I've always kind of been, just in general life, I hit a middle of the road person. I approach leadership from, you should look at where someone can be, not where they are. Because if you're looking to develop a leader, you're looking where that person can grow to, not where they are. Because if they were already a great leader and all this perfect stuff, well, then they wouldn't be working on getting promoted. So, and women, I feel like, should want to treat their men the same way. Like, hey, how can I help this man grow rather than treating him bad, and that's just, so when she was saying those things, I'm just like, man, I was floored. And then the more I start looking on YouTube, there is a section of women out there that think this way, and they're okay with it. But you can definitely tell that outside of certain spaces, they're definitely not willing to talk about it because of how they're going to get treated by their fellow peers, fellow women. And I was so floored by it. I was floored by it, and I was like, wow.
I bet the comments from men on under those videos are just, oh man, I love you. I would love to meet someone like you. Really
Yeah,
supportive.
yeah. I look on some of her stuff, and some of it, mostly it's guys like, on Emily's thing saying, "Oh, thank God, some a woman says it." But then there are still some women on there that are going, "Oh, you don't get it. You're this or you're that." And I'm like, man, some women they are vicious towards each other. Like, and I was like, okay. It was just an eye-opening thing because I guess I grew up in a fairly stable household, met my wife, married her. I'm in an industry that has women in it in general. So I didn't really experience what some of these other folks have. And then I'm seeing it, and then I start looking around myself, and I'm going, man, some of these divides, some of these things were already there. And honestly, I never really felt too much that way until after I had gotten married, right? And then you start seeing certain scenarios and you start thinking in your head, well, me and my wife never discussed this before we got married. If I lost my job and I was down and dying, are you going to be there to support me or going to put me down? That's just generally not a conversation you have, before you're married. You're like, yes, I'll do it, till death do us part, all the positive, warm and fuzzy feelings. Everybody talks about, we have to talk about money, right? And money is only one aspect of it, but it's the actions that impact the money, right? And I don't think that, like, if a man feels that his wife or spouse, whoever, is not going to support him in that atmosphere, that'll unmotivate a man. And especially what that woman is trying to get him to do, he's going to roll backwards, he's going to avoid it, and he's going to shut down and go do his thing.
Several things that you've said have brought me kind of in my mind to the domestic violence issue, including that one. And I started thinking about a man crying, you were mentioned, and I've seen videos of that where people are laughing they're uncomfortable with the man crying, they're laughing at him. And there are videos of where actors are pretending to have domestic violence, the man against the woman and the woman against the man, and bystanders are quick to intervene if the man is abusing the woman, but if the woman is abusing the man, they are much, much more likely to be laughing or clapping for her, cheering her on. And the domestic violence issue is a prime example of what you were talking about earlier, where it's this multi-billion-dollar industry that depends on domestic violence. And they're making a lot of money, and
Yeah.
so they really don't have the incentive to do the things that would end it. And the research for like 45 years now has been consistently finding that women assault their partners as often as men, consistently. And most of this research is done by feminists. They're not necessarily happy with what they find, but they're honest about what they find. These are not the statistics that are bandied about in the media, but it's consistently found with the scientific research, thousands of studies now.
Yeah, and we need more, in my personal opinion, we need more people like you in the media. So, and hopefully one day myself, but I highly doubt it. But because I feel like if these issues were represented as what they are, we wouldn't be so divided where the media, like we are saying, makes the money dividing us. There's a
And
whole lot less
yeah,
money.
right.
But I mean, my approach is like, hey, I think that there is a market for people wanting to find common ground. It's just not really been exploited, if you want to call it, explored. I feel like it's there, but nobody's going after it because the obvious easy thing is to say men bad or women bad, pour the money in,
Yeah.
let's make a profit.
I think most people care about domestic violence and want to end it, but we can't just expect that the people who are making a lot of money off domestic violence have that same motivation. Because if we acknowledge that women do assault their partners as often as men, it would certainly help the male victims, but it would also help female victims that this industry claims to care about, because so many of their injuries are a result of violence that they initiate, and their injuries never would have happened if we started to talk seriously and condemn violence by women and say there's never an excuse for violence by a woman either. And the researchers also find that children are just as damaged if they see mom hitting dad or dad hitting mom. So if we care about children, then we would also want to acknowledge this. So to care about male victims, to care about female injuries, to care about children, we would want to do this. But the people who are making millions of dollars off it don't really care about that.
No, and they never will. I've seen several, well, not several, but plenty of videos on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube where it's a domestic violence situation, and you can clearly see the man just got obliterated by a woman with something, and then she'll like have like this big bruise on her body, and he's automatically in handcuffs. Oh, we're just detaining. And then by the end of the video, they were like, well, yeah, she kind of admitted she beat you up. But it goes back to he was automatically assumed the aggressive party. So he was detained right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, man, it's like, I mean, to me, you can clearly see in some of these videos who was the aggressor. Not always,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
but I feel like in certain situations, women are pushed to, I want to say like victim trained, right? Because that's not the thing, but it's automatically like, hey, if you're in this situation, you're going to be the victim. If you hit a man with a frying pan and he hits you back to get you to stop, if you're hitting him repeatedly, you're the victim because he earned it. And I sit there and I'm like, well, no, man, if you're beating me to death with a frying pan, I'm not going to try to kill you, but I'm popping you back. Like,
And
sorry if that,
you
sorry
will
if that
live
hurt.
rent.
Right, but it'll still be my fault in the end. Like, she could be hit me 1,000 times, but if I swing back somehow and break her nose, I'm the one that's going to go to jail.
Yeah, I remember I was in a relationship with a woman who assaulted me several times, and the police were there, and one of the cops gave me, I still remember his words, were, the next time she starts swinging at you, you better get out of there fast, because if she just misses and hits the wall and breaks a fingernail, we're going to arrest you. And he was on my side, like, but that's all he could do, because they're committed to being on the side of the woman. And when you were talking, I thought of another victim group that's hurt by this, because I said the male victims, the female injured, and children, lesbians. Because the dirty secret of the domestic violence movement is that the rate of domestic violence in lesbian relationships is at the same level as heterosexual relationships, but we don't talk about them and their victims, and they don't get the same services, because that ruins the narrative, that because there's no man to blame in that, so we don't want to talk about it.
Right, and a lot of that stems from this mantra that at least I grew up with, is that your spouse, your wife, she's perfect, she's beautiful, all this stuff. Not that I'm ever putting my own spouse down, right? But that fuels the woman can do no wrong. She's beautiful. I put her on a pedestal. That's my wife. I show her around. Well, there's no okay, hey, that's what that is. But you also got to be a grown adult and treat your partner accordingly. Some women are put on a pedestal, right? Hey, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, da 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 da. And if that woman has an aggressive side that that man has not seen yet, well, now to me, it creates an open door to I'm right, you're wrong, I'm the beautiful one. You're subservient to me, but you got to do and provide me with everything that I want. And I think that kind of, not that I'm ever saying, hey, we shouldn't be, telling our spouses that, hey, you're beautiful, whatever. No, because I definitely think that, if that's the way you feel, you should. But I think that to a degree, part of that mentality spills over into the toxic mentality, and then it's used as a way to funnel and create domestic violence.
Yeah. There's something I need to say because I don't know how much time we have left. I really enjoy speaking with you. And I'm really grateful to Jack for giving me this opportunity.
Appreciate
You
it.
need to schedule another podcast with Jack Hammer because you'll love it.
Yeah, I see Jack over there. I can see the ideas rolling in his head. I can see he's got a lot to say over there. Like I can just see it. And that's a good thing, Jack. That is a very, very good thing. Never a bad thing. I mean,
We are getting ready to wrap up, and I don't know what your plans are, Joe. You cannot let Fred get away without telling the what story, Fred?
I thought I was getting away with
You're
it.
not.
Jack wants me to tell you this how I got kicked off the Oprah Winfrey show.
oh man,
This was the first time I was on. They started with the feminist assumptions that if somebody's critical, feminism is all about equality. So if you're critical of feminism, you don't want equality, you're a sexist, and that was their assumption. And so her introduction, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was to the effect of, we all know that men don't really have any serious problems, but somebody wants to talk about them anyway. Please welcome Fred Hayward. And I'm used to the devil's advocate thing. I got that. I guess I just wasn't in the mood that day. And I said, the black population in prison is 8 times as high proportionately as the rest of the population. Why do you think that is? So now she's thinking he's not just a sexist, but he's a racist. And she gave all the liberal explanations for that, the social and economic problems and discrimination, everything, and that's why more blacks are incarcerated than whites. It's not their fault. And I said, well, okay, so blacks are 8 times as likely to be incarcerated as the rest of the population. You're saying that that's a symptom that they have serious problems, more serious problems. Men are 24 times as likely to be incarcerated as the rest of the population. So, by your logic, isn't this a symptom that we do have something important to talk about today? And they cut to a commercial, and the producer walked up to me and said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. This isn't going the way we planned.
wow. That is, I don't even know how to respond to that. I mean, that's just people not like on that side of like in that sphere. We'll call it better, maybe that sphere, right? Not wanting to recognize that some of these problems are like we were saying interdependent with the sexes, but they're interlinked, and then they're just presented differently depending on the group. Like men definitely do get treated a lot harsher by the court system than women. I mean,
and yet
that's obvious.
feminists say it's the opposite, and they're not challenged in the media. I've seen many news reports quoting feminists as saying, women are treated more harshly by the criminal system, and they don't get a quote from the other side. They don't challenge it. Feminists get away with incredible things that when you think about it, like everybody knows, wait a second, that's not true. And
Oh
people are
yeah,
afraid to challenge it.
no, they are. It's a big shame that people are afraid to challenge it because people are afraid to challenge ideas or stereotypes or even what we used to believe was a fact. Like I kind of talk about a little bit sometimes RFK. And I mean, I know he's like an extremely controversial person with a lot of his views. But where I say I like is that he's challenging the status quo. He's not necessarily saying we can't do any of these things ever again. But I always think it's fair to challenge the status quo, but you got to do it in a respectful manner. You know what I mean? And he's willing to do that. And he's just not afraid of it. He's like, hey, this is me. This is what I believe. Let's challenge it. Let's look at it. And I'm like, man, we need more people like that. But he also isn't derogatory towards the people that are derogatory towards him. He just says, hey, this is what it is. This is what I see. And sometimes I try to tell people, at least in my opinion, is science right? Science is right in theory all the time. But what was right in science 100 years ago sometimes is proven wrong now. So, and one of the things that I learned in science growing up was challenge everything. But now when you do that, people are like, hey, whoa, why are you challenging my idea? Everybody wants to. I did an AI podcast last night, and this guy, he's making a dating app that's AI based. And kind of what it does is it recognizes patterns in both parties rather than sending you what you want. Like, you want this beautiful woman that looks like this. Boom, sending it to you. She has this kind of interest. Well, what it does is if you like to eat out at, let's say, an Indian restaurant, it's going to match you with a woman who does that. But is there a link between something else that you two like that may cause an issue? So, and I'm like, okay, this is great. But then we're talking about AI, and he goes, yeah, people use it's Chat GPT. That's like the big one. And he goes, Chat GPT is going to tell you what you want to hear. If you say, why do I this, that, or the other thing? Why am I a bad person? It's go, well, you're not a bad person. It's just you're misunderstood. And I'm like, man, this is a guy who knows how to program this stuff going, yeah, it's just going to tell you what you want to hear. And I was like, I mean, I kind of knew that, just from messing around with it, but it was very telling to hear it from a guy who actually does it and programs this kind of stuff for a living. He actually wrote one of the Snap algorithms for AI. And it was crazy. And I'm just sitting there going, and I'm like, man, part of that is why we have the issues, like going back to masculinity, feminism. You search on the internet, masculinity, why men are bad, man, you're going to find a gajillion sites. Same on it, why are certain feminists, they're just terrible people. Boom, you're going to find a gajillion sites. But when you start trying to find, hey, how can we solve the problem, like what you talk about, you might see a site or two. And then everything goes right back to dividing right below.
Thing goes back to what?
It'll like all the sites. So you have like a site or two that'll be like, hey, this is what we want to solve this problem.
Oh,
But then right under it, all the sites under it will go right back to dividing you. So essentially what he was trying to say is it knows if you're truly looking for something to tell you what you want to hear. So it'll kind of put something there, and then it plugs in everything else you want to see.
I've only used Chat GPT once in my life, and it was a failure. So I don't have experience with that.
I've messed around with it because my kid, he's 15, so he's just and so then I started messing around with it, making some animated videos with it, and just exploring it, right? And I had seen his profile, and I'm like, man, I really love to talk to this guy and just pick his brain, And I told him, I said, I think America has a problem of everybody thinks of Terminator 2, and they think of AI. That one day they're going to wake up and AI is taking over their screen or whatever, and here come the nuclear bombs falling on them. And I said, yeah, and I'm like, I feel like that is the biggest narrative behind AI that's holding it back. So I said, where's the off switch? And he even openly said to me, he goes, well, if there's some crazy person somewhere, we don't exactly know how we would turn it off outside of shutting the power off to his house. And I was like, that was just that was brutally honest. I was like, okay. I was like, at least it's out there, and it was definitely a telling thing, right? And it kind of just made me think, like, okay, you go back to like the masculine thing, right? Okay, so are the people who are programming some of these things setting it all up? They're setting it up to divide us. Same with like the media. It's just all this like big conglomerate to keep men split against black against white. And folks like you, like Jack, and hopefully me one day, like just trying to find like, hey man, we're all in this together. Let's never give up. We need to love one another. We're all in it together. Like there's things that, I'll never be able to have a child ever. It's just not what I was born to do, right? That's not my biological function. And that's okay. But then some of the feminist things you turn on are, well, women have to bear the children, men don't have to do that. I mean, I get it, I get the point. Why are we all so upset about this? There's literally nothing you're going to be able to do to change it. I mean, maybe when science advances in 500 years, something like that. But in reality, unless science figures out how to change how your brain releases dopamines and things of that nature to make you think that you're a certain kind of thing, it's just always going to be that way. And that's, I don't know, to me, it's okay. It's okay that a woman has a baby, but there's also, certain expectations put on men that a woman just does not seem to have. And I guess that's where like folks like you come in and try to balance the scales. Like the justice scale. But it's got to be like brought up to an even level.
Got to be in balance.
Before we wrap up here, Jack, you got anything you wanna? I mean, I'm definitely down to do another episode with you, Jack.
I'd be happy to, Joe, but I'm glad you got the opportunity to talk to Fred. He's
Yeah, I
he's
really appreciate that.
the original.
Yeah, I mean, you've been doing it a long time, Fred, and I mean, I think from every male and every reasonable woman on the planet, I think everybody owes folks like you a thank you. Somebody out there that is a voice of reason, and that's seems to have been lost, but it's still out there somewhere. So that's folks like you are hard to find, and definitely they're kept out of the public eye completely to me these days. They're not as talked about. So I can say, at least from my crowd of people, thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you, Jack.
Yeah,
Pleasure,
and
Fred.
I think both of you, Jack, I look forward to having you on. I'll shoot you an email next day or so. Maybe we can get something set up.
Well, look forward to it.
Okay, you guys have a good day. It was good meeting you both.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.